You will have seen in the Nudgestock news paper that you have, which is our first innovation for this year. We'll be talking about some more of those later, that we do have a slight change to the originally advertised schedule today. Unfortunately, Professor Robert Frank, who was due to be our first speaker, was suddenly taken ill. So I'm sure you'll join me in wishing him all the best for a speedy recovery. But we have been very lucky in that the brilliant Robert Colville has kindly stepped in, and you will have seen the changed agenda in your newspaper, to take his place this morning. So thanks especially to Robert for doing that. Now, this is actually my first Nudgestock, having recently returned last year from Australia. And those of you who've been here in previous years may know that one of the biggest challenges that we have is that there's so much exciting stuff that we want to talk through today that the schedule can overrun a little, particularly when Rory gets into his stride. So I thought to myself this year, how can we apply some behavioural economics to this problem? How can we actually use some relevant principles to try and keep us to time and keep us to the schedule that you've got in your paper? So I thought about how can we use the principle of loss aversion, which is that we hate to lose twice as much typically than we like to gain. So how can I use that to encourage Rory to stick to the timelines? What would be the thing that Rory would hate to lose more than anything else? So if you just put up the slide here. So basically, for every minute that Rory goes over time, we're going to be donating £5 to the Remain campaign over the course of the day as a way to use loss aversion to keep him to time. And over the course of the day, I will give you a running total update on how much we've raised for that campaign. Without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to the man that we call our dear leader at Ogilvy Change, Rory Sutherland, who's going to host the day for you.
All done? Perfect. Excellent. So, I'm going to be very brief. By the way, I'm not even decided, but if you work for a multinational agency and you're undecided, you're treated as some sort of, effectively nationalistic lunatic. I just thought I'd explain that framing just for a moment there. So welcome everybody to the UKIP Riviera, or what I like to call Salcombe for Satisficers. Perfectly good coast, about an hour from London, as opposed to a slightly better coast, which is a 3-hour drive away. Think about that, folks, next time you're planning a UK-based holiday. What I'm just here to talk about, this is the fourth Nudgestock. The first one was in London, the second in Deal. Last year we were here. It's absolutely delighting to me to see it growing. It's amazing to me to see that people, for example, Binnit's today, for whom a big shout out has come all the way from India to be here. So I'm especially amazingly honoured about the effort people make to make it down here. There is a reason why we have it here, which I will explain very shortly. But what we're really about is, this is my new definition of marketing, it's just the science of knowing what economists are wrong about. It's nothing, but it's quite a wide field, it has to be said. The point about this is that when I'm criticizing economics, just to be clear, I'm not criticizing Joseph Stiglitz here. What I'm saying is that very, very narrow understanding of economics has become a proxy for understanding human behavior in very large parts of business and finance, to a point where effectively people are designing products and services and experiences for Homo economicus and not for Homo sapiens. This doesn't generally happen with physical products. If you think about it, we design a steering wheel to fit with our hands, or a kettle, or a door handle. No one thinks that we evolved hands in order to steer cars. You just design steering wheels to work with the evolutionary equipment we've got. But when it comes to anything above the neck, we design, instead of for the mental equipment we've got, we design for a kind of theoretical, economist, mathematicized preconception of what people should be trying to do. Now, the reason I think economists and marketers will never get on is that nearly all standard economic models, for the purposes of neatness, assume that people are making decisions under conditions of perfect information and perfect trust. And of course, under such conditions, there will be no need for marketing or advertising at all. So if you've ever wondered why your finance director can't help but see marketing as a cost and not a source of competitive advantage, it's because his mind has been tainted by the assumptions of the model. Now, there are two problems with those assumptions, by the way, one of which is that those conditions exist on Earth somewhere between very rarely and never, and it's closer to never. The second thing is, even if you could recreate those conditions, our brains have not evolved to make decisions in those conditions. There's nothing about our brains which is optimized to make optimal decisions based on perfect information, because in the ancestral environment, we never came across such conditions. So it would be highly weird if evolution had equipped us with mental mechanisms designed for a world that didn't exist. So very simply, what I noticed very, very quickly is that economists didn't understand marketing at all, but evolutionary biologists understood advertising and marketing brilliantly. Instinctively, they call it signaling, I grant that, but they understand it absolutely completely. And they're also much more fun, by the way. I mean, the great thing about evolutionary psychologists is they do for the social sciences what the Ramones did for music. They're kind of a dissident, mischievous group of people who are kind of sitting at the back of the bus, mooning coach drivers and flicking snot at the other social scientists who are sitting at the front. So they're also fantastic people to hang around with. But in addition to this, the reason they understand marketing and advertising enormously is because nature itself has a huge marketing budget. A flower is simply a weed with an advertising budget. There is an astonishing amount of activity in nature which is nothing to do with narrowly defined efficiency. In fact, it's more complicated than this. Not only do flowers put a lot of effort into making themselves noticeable, they put a lot of effort into producing a smell so that bees actually notice them. And bees have learnt to recognize smells which are reliable indicators of a high quantity of pollen. So there are certain smells which you can only produce if you can produce a large amount of pollen, and bumblebees have evolved to prefer that. Now, something that intelligent, if something with so small an IQ as a bee or a flower can work out advertising and marketing mechanisms of this kind, then I don't think it's impossible to believe that humans have evolved a similar capability of spotting reliable signals which are reliable because they're costly. Flowers have also invented the IKEA effect, by the way, which is that you make it quite difficult to get into the flower in order to get the pollen, because having then mastered it, the bee, having gone through all that effort, is disproportionately keen to do it again. And flowers obviously benefit if bees stick to the same species of flower. So they create actually a degree of added difficulty, like IKEA. The IKEA effect works because having effectively navigated an extraordinary maze, it's impossible and intolerable to go home empty-handed when you think about it. You know, that would be the retail equivalent of coitus interruptus. You know, that would just be absolutely unthinkable. The other problem I have with economics is a very simple one. As a copywriter of sort of 30 years, it's immensely creatively limiting. And this is the guy who was the Director General of CERN, who then became an expert on British energy policy, and he wanted to change the way that people consumed energy, like the time of day or the amount or the nature. And his despairing observation made at the Santa Fe Institute was, when I ask economists for advice, it always boils down to bribing people. Now, actually, when you think about it, quite often the economic solution, which is changing reality, changing price, is the expensive alternative to the psychological solution. Anybody use Ocado here? If they'd gone to an economist, they're very keen to have people in the same place order deliveries at the same time. Okay? Now, what an economist would have done is said, well, it's very easy. Whenever you have someone who's already made a booking in a particular area, that person, you should just drop the price of delivery. They didn't do that. I don't know whether they couldn't do it for technological reasons or because they just didn't want to. There's a theoretical reason they might not have done it, which is you could have gamed the system. You get your neighbor to book a delivery, then you book the cheap one yourself, and then you get them to cancel. And that's a possible theoretical explanation, okay? I don't know if Ocado shoppers are really that evil, but you never know, okay? But they didn't do it. They just kept the prices the same, and they made the van green, right? That's it. Now, the interesting thing is that you could argue this is choice reduction. You could argue it's a case of genuine altruism on the part of the shopper. You could argue that the smaller number of green vans just makes it easier. You look at them first and only move on to the purple one second. But you could argue it's path dependency. I don't know. I asked them for figures on how effective this was. They said, I can't tell you. I said, go on, please. They said, no, we really can't tell you. It's confidential. Well, what can you tell me? Let me just tell you this. You wouldn't believe it. Now, you won't like me for this. I said the same to airlines. I said, the whole airline pricing model is based on the assumption if you want someone to go on a 3 p.m. flight rather than a noon flight, you drop the price. I said to the airlines, have you tried just telling people this is the emptier flight? They'll go on it anyway. So quite often, what you see in economics is it's extraordinarily creatively limiting because it only effectively addresses about one of the 15 levers you can actually pull or push in changing behavior. And my way of looking at it is not that it's wrong. In certain fields, it's very, very good. It's like the London Tube map, which for certain journeys is really, really good. Okay? If you're north of the river, it's a pretty good map. There are huge biases there. You're better off walking from Paddington to Lancaster Gate if you want to get the Central Line. The most common tourist journey made on the London Underground is, I think, between Leicester Square and Covent Garden, which is a distance which you could basically throw a cricket ball if you are fairly talented, okay? There are biases in it, but it's not bad. Where the tube map goes hopelessly wrong and where economics goes hopelessly wrong is out of area, okay? So what I would say is there are a large number of business problems which I define as South London problems. They're not very well covered by the tube map. South London has half the population of London, but it has something like 13% of the tube stations. And where people go wrong and where economics becomes a problem is when people use the map to stand in for the territory, as if the map is the territory. It stops becoming an aid to decision-making and starts becoming effectively the answer. The same thing can be applied to sat-navs. And this, I think, has happened with economics throughout the business world and throughout the financial world to a really, really dangerous extent. Now, just to give you an example, we moved just to Blackfriars, just here. And I was asking people in my sort of, vaguely paternalistic way, how's your journey to work now that we've moved to the new office? And a few people kept saying it's quite difficult because I actually come into St Pancras. And I said, well, that's not difficult at all. You go down the escalator and you get on the Thameslink train at the front and you're sort of 50 yards from the office. What the hell's the problem? And about 4 people said, oh, coming to King's Cross is actually a bit difficult. Oh, why are we employing these incredibly stupid people, I was thinking. And then I realized Thameslink isn't on the tube map. And railways aren't on the tube map. And this is actually a proper map of the transport networks of London. Now, what I'm arguing is that what behavioral science, neuroscience, and evolutionary psychology, I think, can lend to us, and particularly to people in the marketing thing, is what I call the map of South London. There are problems where if you try and use, just as there are journeys in South London, North Londoners, by the way, are, they're a bit like, the finance function. They're completely unaware that South London exists. They have no idea how South Londoners get about. They assume they effectively, every morning when they go to work, they tie their possessions in a spotted handkerchief, put it on a stick, and sling it over their shoulder. There's actually an incredibly well-developed rail network of which nobody north of the river knows the slightest thing. Just to prove, by the way, the extent to which a map defines behavior, when the overground, which had always existed, it was called Silverlink Metro, okay? It had run between Stratford and Richmond for previous 20 years. I used it about 10 years ago. It was like Bad Day at Black Rock. I mean, I was the only person on the train. When that network was rebranded as Overground and added to the tube map, the usage went up 400% in the space of 4 weeks. That's the extent to which the map you use distorts the decisions you make. So all I'm thinking is that if we start to understand the South London parts of the human mind, as well as the economists' North London parts of the human mind, there will be problems that we once thought were impossible and insurmountable, which will suddenly appear easy. We will suddenly develop what I call the cognitive equivalent of the Croydon tram network, if you like, which is that journeys which once looked impossible suddenly become apparently easy. What you'll also start to notice, I promise I'll end very quickly because I can see the UKIP supporters in the crowd getting slightly edgy at this point. You also notice that actually most really successful products have a North London component and a South London component. Yes, if you're an engineer like James Dyson, you believe the entire reason for the success of this product is its superior suction power and baglessness. That's not untrue. I wouldn't claim for a second if you made a really cool-looking vacuum cleaner that was crap, that it would be a great success. But a large part of the appeal of that is actually monkey-brained. In particular, that vacuuming a floor is much more rewarding when you have a feedback mechanism, i.e. you can see the dirt that you're collecting as you collect it. That's basically a kind of, it's a foraging. This is probably based on a foraging instinct somewhere. No one is shaking their head furiously. But the fact that you're actually getting a fairly rapid reward makes vacuuming more pleasurable. Equally, I keep reading articles about The Economist which talk about the efficiency of Uber. I would argue the two most significant things. I would say that just as if you had created a Dyson which had all the superior vortex cleaning power, but you'd put it in an opaque beige exterior, no one would have bought it, certainly at those prices. I would also argue that Uber would have gone nowhere if you hadn't had the map to watch the car approaching and you had to pay cash and ask for a paper receipt. I'd argue they could have enjoyed all the other theoretical advantages, but if they hadn't had those two South London mind hacks as part of the product, it would have gone nowhere. I'm going to end now just to say that it probably goes a bit deeper than that. How many of you will admit to this? There's a male thing where you synchronize your flushing of the lavatory so that the end of urination coincides with the end of the flush. Anybody do that? No one will admit to it. Just me then. Come on. This is yeah, thank you. Thank you. My goodness, what a dishonest crowd. Similarly, I think there's an Uber thing, which is that we deliberately time our appearance onto the pavement to coincide with the arrival of the vehicle so we can reenact the final scene from The Usual Suspects. But that may just be me. So I'll end on one very simple thing. What you suddenly realize is there are extraordinary things which can be solved with tiny, tiny interventions. And this is probably my favorite. I'm going to tell you another one later on. This is my favorite mind hack of the last few years. When you go to Wagamama for the first time, they will ask you, or actually when you go to Wagamama at all, they will say, have you ever been to Wagamama before? Have you noticed this? And if you answer no, they will say, what you need to understand is it's based on an authentic Japanese noodle bar, which means that the food is taken to the table fresh from the kitchen, so it's fresh and hot, which means it won't necessarily be in the order you expect. Now, why is that sentence probably pivotal to the survival and thriving of Wagamama? Because if you didn't have that sentence, 50% of people would leave the restaurant for the first time and go in complete chaos. They don't know what they're doing. You know, I ordered a vast bowl of soup, and the bloody duck gyoza arrived after the soup, right? People are total chaos. They're not taking their customers seriously. What a bunch of wankers. I won't go there again. If you say it's based on an authentic Japanese noodle bar, we all go, oh, I see the food is arriving fresh from the kitchen, based on an authentic Japanese noodle bar. And it turns, so don't bother trying to change objective reality. It's really expensive and tiring. Just change perception, please, okay? Now, I gave this presentation, and someone in the audience was Japanese. He said, it's not even true, he said. In a Japanese noodle bar, things run to military precision, and everything arrives exactly in the order you'd expect. Now, in fairness, one other Japanese person contradicted that. So I don't know whether this is Wagamama engaging in Plato's version of the benign lie, or whether it's in fact true. I'll end on the last thing. I'm going down to Cannes in a few weeks, but no ad I will see in Cannes will be as great as this in terms of changing perception uttered by a British Airways pilot, okay? Now, those of you who fly a bit know that weird sinking feeling. And there's an argument that just as the best three words in the English language are all-day breakfast, okay, the worst three words in the English language are bus replacement service. And when you arrive by plane and there's a bus, you're absolutely, basically gutted and furious. You feel cheated, disrespected, everything's awful. And generally, the pilot apologizes for there being a bus. And one occasion, it's only happened once. The pilot said, I've got good news and bad news, he said. The bad news is we haven't been able to get an air bridge, so you'll need to be bused to the terminal. The good news is the bus will take you right next to immigration control, so you won't have to walk very far. That was the first time I'd ever had the opportunity in my own brain to reframe it as a positive. If you think of something as being universally bad and awful, you have absolutely no mental escape. If you can reframe something as being on the one hand, on the other hand, you can make people, you can effectively synthesize happiness. Because people will seize on the one positive, make it more salient, and actually be happy with the outcome. Now, I said at the beginning I'd explain why we're down here. I actually I live in West Kent, and I have a holiday flat in East Kent. As I explained to my wife, life, it's all about contrasts. And people said, why do you do that? Why do you move down to East Kent? And I said, there's a very simple reason. It's about pace. that one of the things you don't control in your life, much as we believe we have free will, is actually the pace at which you do things. I know this as a 50-year-old in an advertising agency, that young people effectively burn old people out by turning their comparative advantage in energy into a competitive advantage. But you don't have any choice about the pace in which you do anything in a collective organization. It's somehow set centrally. Or arguably the pace is set by the most impatient people. And the reason I like to go another 70 miles further away from London is precisely I'm buying a different pace. And so my next speaker, who's standing in for Robert, to whom all get well messages, I will also make sure that Robert appears. Robert will be in London in the next 6 months when his book launches, and I will make sure you're all invited to a talk with him then. So you won't miss out. But we have a fantastic replacement in the man who's written The Great Acceleration and one of the most fantastic writers on science, psychology, and technology you'll ever see, Robert Colville. Thank you very much indeed.